you living your life, you are always looking up to someone, but also, most likely, someone might be looking up to you. And your actions will impact how people perceive you and might actually follow in your own actions. For what nation is there so great? And what great nation is there that has such statutes and righteous judgment as are in all this law which I set before you this day? This lesson is basically an appeal, and it's talking about how right now Israel is about to start their journey of representing God on earth to all these other nations. And basically, here's the moment where in the lesson it's saying all the stuff that has happened, who they could be, is very important. And for a good reason. I mean, they have spent so many years, 40 years in the desert, people seeing how they have reacted to things, manna falling down from heaven, battles where they should have lost, completely winning, or just the fact that they're in a desert land, there's nothing to eat, millions of people somehow surviving. This is a great witness anyway. So they've already started that journey, but now they're going to become a nation, which means the way that they rule, the way that they respond to things, the way that they interact with other nations from this point on is going to represent God, is going to represent an ideal, right? And so here, it's setting the stage. And the appeal is specifically focused for how Israel should act. And you can see the title of the lesson, right? It's saying, for what nation is there so great? It's trying to explain that Israel is supposed to be unique. They're supposed to be this people who have, it just doesn't make sense to the world that they live in, to the way that they're going to act. But there are the warnings and all the things that we read so far with the laws, and knowing what ends up with Israel, what happens later, it's a crucial moment. And it's tough because Israel, they're receiving all of this, right? And it's got this strong appeal for them. It's supposed to make sure that they keep pushing and representing God. Now, how does that work, right? If we're looking at things in a certain path, if we're going a certain way, we feel like it's completely doable. But what it's talking about is almost multiple times how they've sinned, how they've worshipped other idols. And it's frustrating to see Israel continuously failing. And it doesn't make sense why they're failing until you see the context, right? They're giving a little bit at a time until it's unrecognizable. They're inching forward into these mistakes. And it still serves, this lesson, in spite of all that, is serving as a way to make us understand and be inspired. And so I decided to take a nugget, a portion of the lesson, and just kind of focus on that, because this is what I think is really important. So look at this quote from Wednesday. The Lord wants the people to realize that they have been called, chosen for a special reason. They are a great nation, just as God had told Abram right from the first call of the Chaldean that I will make a great nation. I'll make you a great nation. So that's the promise. That's what God wants to fulfill, right? And what I wanted to focus on, what was interesting to me, is one specific aspect. Basically, Israel at that time, the world around them was ruled by kings. And here, this nation is about to be created without a king, where God is supposed to rule, right? And we know that later they didn't want to be a nation without a king. But here it's showing something different. Why I bring that up is because today we don't like the fact that monarchy existed. It's something that is almost like a bad history. Because think about it. One person is deciding your entire future, your entire fate, and bloodlines are determining your worth. Whereas here God is saying, no, you are all my children, right? It's setting us in this equal playing field. And the words that are being used is making us understand that. And here God is pointing that out. It's going to be this big beacon to the whole world saying, this is what should be done. And sadly, Israel falls into, again, that trap where they want to do things like the world surrounding them. And what's sad to think, even when Israel was completely destroyed, everything destroyed, all Israelites were scattered, right? Israel got scattered and eventually came back after Babylon attacked them after 90 years. And here they are back. They still had a king. So the ideal from this moment where God was planning never happened again. Even though they had a second chance to rebuild, it was never that original plan that God had for them. So even then, the beacon that we're seeing right here never happened. We just got a small little glimpse of it, and then it was over. And it's interesting because the standards that we always see in the world is almost the standards that we set for ourselves, even though God is looking so far ahead. I mean, think about that. A nation that was ruled based on more of these ideas of checks and balances and not having power in one individual who could be corrupt. That was God's plan all along. Eventually, through a lot of bloodshed and frustration of not knowing what to do, we reach something that's working, right? But all the way back then, God had already planned something. So I wanted to end by getting that thought and kind of making us think about how we are being impacted by things today, how we are being pushed through certain standards because the world around us we're trying to emulate. So look at this quote from Friday. From the very beginning of the great controversy in heaven, it has been Satan's purpose to overthrow the law of God. It was to accomplish this that he entered upon his rebellion against the Creator. And though he was cast out of heaven, he has continued the same warfare upon the earth. To deceive men and thus lead them to transgress God's law is the object which he has steadfastly pursued. So here we are seeing this is what Satan is always doing. This is what he did with Israel, and he's still trying to do this now. So I want to ask, your actions, what are you doing? Are you doing it because you feel like you want to fit in? Or are you doing it because God is calling or showing something different? His law of love that is trying to free us. What's pushing you forward?